Mark, can you hear me?
Sounds good, Rachel.
Okay, great. If you guys wouldn't mind taking a brief moment to answer this question, how much do you know about Visio? Okay, the vast majority of you, about 80%, know a little bit. About a quarter of you know some. And there's a few who know a lot, but none of you are saying that you're unfamiliar with the topic completely, so that's good. Mark, I'm not sure if it's on your end or not, but I'm getting a lot of static right now. Mark, can you hear me? Mark? Bear with us one moment. Bear with us one moment, everyone. We're trying to get Mark reconnected and get some of his feedback off of the mic situated. Feel free to keep voting in our poll, though, while we get our technical difficulties in control. A lot of you are saying that you're not hearing Mark. I don't hear him either, so I'm with you. We are trying to get this worked out right now. Everyone, thank you for joining us. We are getting a little technical glitch worked out. Mark will be joining us in a moment, and our training session will begin shortly. Bear with us one moment, everyone. Mark is logging back in, and hopefully our technical issues with sound will be resolved. For those of you who are just now joining us, please bear with us a moment. We're having some technical difficulties, and Mark is logging back in now, so hopefully the audio issues will be resolved. Bear with us for one more moment, please. Hi, Mark. Are you with us?
Hey Rachel, I'm back.
Okay, great. Much, much better.
Okay, brilliant.
Okay,
Glad
great.
we could get it sorted out in time.
Yes. All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. And thank you guys so much. I'm going to share the results with you. As you can see, the majority of you are at least a little familiar with Visio. So this should be a good session for everyone. And if you're ready, Mark, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you and make you presenter.
Hi, thanks Rachel.
Sure. Everyone have a great session.
Okay everyone, I'm about to show my screen. I'm going to talk through a little bit of the theory before we actually dive in and go into Visio. We'll spend a bit of time taking you through the various intricacies of the Visio environment. There's some really advanced stuff that you can do in Visio that many of you probably won't see because it's a little bit hidden. What we'll do after that is we'll actually publish the Visio document through the Sharepoint so you can actually share your Visio diagrams. So let's kick off. So what is Visio Services? Now, I saw a couple people there don't really know what Visio is, so let's take a minute or two and just talk about what the intent of Visio is. So Visio is a diagramming tool. A database or into a workflow, but really it's about drawing diagrams and actually communicating via means of those diagrams. Now, Visio Services is taking that collaboration around the diagrams and making it much wider so that instead of having to mail around a Visio diagram document, you publish it to a SharePoint site, and people who don't have access to the Visio software can still see the results of your diagrams. With the latest version of Visio Services, those diagrams have gone one step further. They've said, well, not only do we have a diagram, but we can actually change attributes of that diagram based on data. So if something is happening, the example that is often given, probably because it's demoed to the more technical audience, is showing whether or not a server is up, how hard you're hitting that server, and that sort of thing on a diagram that will continually evolve. And I'll show you how to do that basic stuff. You also have beyond that and actually creating your own data graphics, and where the graphic itself will update in response to the data. So Visio Services, really, this is the most common type of use. You've got a process in place, and here we've got a motorcycle manufacturing supply chain, and they're putting it together, and you can really see on this how long it's taking to do particular things. So you look at it and maybe you know that brake calipers shouldn't be taking 45 minutes to assemble, they should be taking 35, and you can instantly see on the diagram. And that's just highlighting the data. Typically what you do as well is you change the color to show red is somewhere that's falling behind. If you have a look at the one truck under rail, it's highlighted that the actual truck body has been highlighted as red. So that's one way of visualizing stuff with Visio Services.
Mark, your audio is cutting in and out. I can't hear you right now at all.
Rachel, is that better?
Oh, much better. Okay, great.
Okay, hopefully we won't have too many audio problems. So one of the things that people ask me is, why would you use Visio Services versus a performance point strategy map? Now, if any of you were with us last week, you would have seen that we can use performance point to connect to a Visio diagram, and actually performance point will drive values through to that diagram, and they'll change color. So very much sounding very similar to what we're doing in Visio Services. There are some advantages to each, and there are some disadvantages to each. So the Visio diagram is really oriented at a particular type of process or a particular metric of data that's not parameterizable. So you're looking at a manufacturing process, and you actually know exactly what that manufacturing process looks like. You're not going to say, well, give me plant X or give me plant Y, because they're very, very different. It also gives you a lot more ability to show custom types of data, so changing the shape, expanding data graphics, and that sort of thing. Performance point strategy map is around making something that's parameterizable, So you can say, well, I want to look at it for plant 1, or I want to look at it for plant 2, or I want to look at it for different business units. But it's limited in that it only lets you update the colors on a graphic. It doesn't let you change anything else about those shapes. And we'll dive in a little bit today on actually changing the physical shape that's been implemented there. Visio Services being driven by data. That's a very generic term. What is data? Maybe data is something that you capture inside your Visio sheet. In this case, you can start off by designing a Visio diagram that is running off data stored inside the sheet. And you can then expand that to start doing data from external sources. So the external sources that are there out of the box, SQL, there's a couple different options for authentication. SharePoint lists, and we're going to do an example of pulling data out of a SharePoint list. And then there's Excel workbooks, and of course any other OLADB or ODBC data source. And when you're connecting to data sources, some of the things you're going to need to think about is how is Visio going to get
Mark, your audio is still cutting out pretty badly. I can't hear you right now at all. Bear with us one moment, please. Mark's going to be correcting his audio momentarily. Mark, we're still unable to hear you.
All right, Jill, am I back?
Ah, you are.
I wish I knew what I was, why it was cutting out so badly. Sorry about that, guys. Okay, so
Mark, you're gone again. We cannot hear you right now. I'm not really sure why the connection.
Can you hear me now?
Now I can. It's going in and out pretty heavily, though.
Sorry about that. Okay, so hopefully this is going to work a little bit better. I'm giving it a second or two to see. What I've done is I've just moved my microphone around. Okay, so what I'm saying is Visio needs to connect to data. If you're inside the Visio client and you connect to SQL, it's going to connect under your authentication, and if you have access, you can get to the data. That's pretty easy. So you take the next step and you upload it to SharePoint. You need to connect to, well, Visio needs to connect to that data source and bring the data in, but you're not logged in. So it needs to have a method of doing that. And we'll talk a little bit about what the different methods are. So Visio Services also has an update refresh interval in the back end. And there's a little bit of a trick to this in that there's two settings for the update refresh. There's Visio Services doing a scheduled update, and then there's the user requesting an update through the web front end. And what has to happen with Visio that's a little bit different is Visio does the refresh on that schedule. The user refresh doesn't necessarily overwrite that. Little trick to keep in mind, and we'll talk through how that works in just a moment. But when Visio is doing this refresh, it needs to actually be able to get into the particular data source. So there's a couple different methods that we can use to do that. The problem is, if your user logs into the Visio Services, your SharePoint server, and SharePoint then needs to go to the database to do a refresh, it can't pass on those credentials. So it'll run under the service account. But of course, letting a service account have access to data sources is a big security risk. So what are the other options that we've got? We've got Kerberos. Now Kerberos makes a lot of sense in a typical BI environment, especially if you're using cubes. User will log into the SharePoint server, he'll get a dashboard. The dashboard will log onto the cube under that user's credentials, and or it could be a database, and it will return the data for him. Now, as I said with the little intricacies with Visio's refresh, sometimes that can actually be a problem that you're not authenticating all the way through. So really, most of the time in Visio Services, we're going to be using something called the Secure Store service, where similar to logging in as this service account, we actually store the user account that Visio should be using inside the secure store service. And then whichever data source you're trying to log into, that is the user account that's going to be used. So without further ado, I'm going to take you guys through some of the demos. And I think, Rachel, are there any questions that are coming up while I just load up the site?
There are, yes. Ramesh would like to know, if we're using SharePoint and shared cloud, then the port may not be available to us, so we may really not have access. Is the solution to this writing service?
That's quite a complicated question. So if you're running SharePoint in a shared cloud, then the port might not be available. So I think, yes, probably abstracting that away in a service that the shared cloud service would have access to and doing the authentication in there, that would work. So I think that would work.
Okay.
Okay.
David has a question as well if you're finished with Ramesh.
Okay, let's take one more and then I'll dive through some of the settings.
Okay. His question is, can you access the services using visualstudio.net?
Yes, there is in fact a Visio Services API. So you can actually use Visio Services from the API. I believe on Microsoft's site there should be a development kit download for doing exactly that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, so first, a couple of things that you guys need to know about getting Visio Services up and running. I spoke about the Secure Store service. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you what you need to set up in the Secure Store service. So in SharePoint, you'd open up your central admin site. And under Application Management, you'd open up the Managed Service Applications. Okay, so the first service application that we're going to manage is going to be the Secure Store service. I actually already have a Visio application set up in there, but I'll show you the steps that you need to go through. If we just give it a second or two while it comes up. Okay, maybe a second or 5 rather than a second or 2. I think this might be the first time that I've opened this up since I rebooted my machine. Okay, opening a new window seemed to work. So in your list of services in SharePoint, here we have the Secure Store service and here we have the Visio Graphics service. So I'm going to start with the Secure Store service and we're going to hit it. Right. Now if you haven't created a Secure Store service application previously, and this is the first one, you're going to have to generate an encryption key. This encryption key is really about encrypting the usernames that you're going to store inside your Secure Store service so that nobody can get to that username and that password. The other thing you're going to do is you're going to create a Secure Store application. A Secure Store application is saying, I have an application that needs to use the Secure Store, and I need to store stuff in it. You can see I've got a couple of the default ones here, the Performance Point one, Excel Services, an alternate PPS one. I'm going to create a new Visio one. So I go hit New. Alright, so I'm going to call this Visio Demo. You would probably call it Visio. You always need to have a contact email. So that's pretty basic. Target application type is quite important. So it's saying, is this application going to be doing logins for one user or is it going to be doing logins for a group? Visio Services, it's always going to be a group. So I'll hit Group and hit Next. This field is just saying, what are we storing inside the Secure Store service? Pretty basic, username and password. Don't change this. If you change it, you're going to break things. And finally, firstly, who is allowed to administer this application? Now in my case, I've got an administrator and my admin is going to administer it. And also, the administrator is the only person who's going to be allowed to use it. You would probably set up an AD user group for the members. Right, so now we've created this Secure Store service account. We've said it's applicable to these people. It's What it doesn't do yet is have a username and password that it can use to log into a data source. So to do that, we can either hit the set credentials here, or there's another set credentials button in the top. And then we set up, we say, which user is it going to use, what password is it going to use. In this case, I'm using the same users because this is a local machine. In your case, you probably wouldn't do that. Cool, so that really is setting up the secure store account. We need to finally tell Visio that it needs to use that. So let me just open that in a new window. Okay, so same window, manage service applications. And this time we're going to go down and go to the Visio graphics service, this one here. All right, so trusted data providers. If you wrote your own data provider, you'd go here. For most cases, the ones that they have are useful. If you're writing your own service, you're probably going to write your own data provider in here. Okay, global settings. Really not all that much to change here. The first one is maximum web drawing size. So how big is the biggest size that you can store? If your Visio documents get bigger than 5 megs, you might have to raise this. Those are pretty big though, because Visio docs don't typically go to 50 megs that often. Okay, so minimum cache age, the default here is 0, and that's saying what's the minimum amount of time that a web drawing is cached. If this is set to higher than 0, you might notice that your updates to your data-driven diagrams don't happen instantly. The default is 5 minutes. So essentially that's saying if you land on the page and the data's changed in the last 5 minutes and somebody's viewed it just before that, you actually won't get the latest drawing. This will catch you out if you haven't actually used it before. Maximum cache stage, so how long can we keep it? And this is just a timeout for when you're querying the data sources. Final one, external data, what application ID should we use? And that's that secure store service that we've just set up. So that's really the setup steps that have to happen. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to jump into Visio and show you guys a couple of cool things. So let me bring my Visio app open here. Now, the first thing is, one of the things that isn't instantly available to you when you open up Visio is the Developer Tab. Now you notice I've got this Developer Tab on the right-hand side. It's a really useful thing. If you don't have it, right-click on Customize the ribbon, and this over there is not enabled by default. So yours would look like that. You might have one or two other ones that are unticked. This gives you the Developer Tab. Why this is useful? Well, we'll see in just a bit. So I'm going to start off with a very basic type of diagram. So I'm going to say network diagram where you want to see how our network is laid out. It's pretty basic. We're going to just add a couple servers. I'm going to say I've got a database server and SQL 01, normal naming conventions. And I've got a web server, and that's Sharepoint 01. Okay, and I know that they're connected, so I'm going to draw a connector. Nothing particularly fancy so far. What we want to do next is, if we go to the data, we've got this defined data. Here we can specify what the fields are. Now this is really storing the data inside the Visio diagram. So we might actually say we want a new one, and we want to say we actually have memory already. Let's say SSD capacity or something. So how much SSD space does it have on it? And we could log a number over there. Cool. And we also want to say that it's got a 2 gigahertz processor. Just has a 1.6 gigahertz processor. And I want to show this information sheet. So edit data graphic, and you're going to do quite a lot of that. And on data graphic, I'm going to say new item. Let's look at CPU. I want to display it as text. And say yes. So let me do that again so you guys can see what I'm doing. Data, edit data graphic. I want a new item. I choose my item, display it as text. So pretty easy, nothing really fancy just yet. We're just displaying a network diagram. Now, the next thing that you can do is our basic diagram, what we want to do is we want to share this diagram so people can see how our network is laid out. What you want to do is instead of saying file save as, you want to jump in and go save and send. So save and send is telling Visio that it's going to publish it. It's not just going to save it as a file. We've got the save to SharePoint option over here. Then important is this thing here. That's a standard drawing, just like you'd saved it to your desktop. This web drawing is really the type that you want if you want it to be displayed in SharePoint. Hit save as. Now, in my case, it's opened up to my SharePoint site already because that's where I've been saving. What you could always do is type in your SharePoint URL for the first one. It'll open up SharePoint site. It'll open up your SharePoint site if you don't leave out a little zero like I did there. Oops. Let's try that again. Yep. And then you can browse your SharePoint site. So.
Mark, your audio's gone again. We can no longer hear you. Oh, are you back?
Rachel, can you hear me now?
Yep, you're back.
I think I'm back.
Okay, yep, you're good.
Cool. So here we go. We've just taken the diagram and it's showing in SharePoint. So that's pretty cool. It isn't dynamic or anything, but it's dropped into SharePoint and it's previewed. Now what we can also do is we can actually embed that on a page. And I think let's go ahead and embed that on a page. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hop over to my SharePoint site, and I've got this page over here. It's got some other stuff on it, and it's got some other metrics. What we want to do is we want to add the service diagram to the same page. So where you need to go is click on business data. Alright, so business data in your categories, and we want Visio Web Access. Alright, opens up a pretty standard SharePoint web part. Click here to open the tool pane, and then we just browse to the web drawing. Okay, so I'm going to browse that documents folder that I put it in. And I'm going to choose the webinar diagram. Okay, so one other thing that might be quite important, depending on what you do, let me just tick that, depending on what you do, this forced raster rendering, what this does is instead of rendering it as an interactive Visio diagram, it renders it as a PNG, has a picture that it renders in the background. Now, depending on how much you've customized your diagram, sometimes you need to use this to force it to render because it might break. So let's hit apply. Cool, pretty basic. You've got zoom in, you've got pan, and all of those other nice things. You've also got the ability to actually pick up what those values are if you hadn't displayed them. So if we scroll up a little bit and we hit CPU, you'll notice that the one that we didn't display is still showing up. All pretty basic so far. Let's jump back to Visio. Now what we want to do is we actually want to make this a bit more dynamic. We want it to be linked to some data. Maybe the data is actually monitoring the CPU usage of these servers. If you've got a piece of software like SCUM or other system monitoring. So I'm going to go to the Data tab, and I'm going to hit Link Data to Shapes. And now in this case, I'm going to use a Sharepoint list that's just got a couple of items of data in it. You could, of course, link to any of these data sources like we spoke about earlier. I'm going to link to one that's in the same site that I've published it to. It doesn't necessarily have to be the same site, but it does make your authentication easier. And I've got a list called Server Status. Now, what you can also do is you can link to a view of a list. So if you've got a list with filters in it, you can use that. In my case, I don't need to. Okay, so here is our data source, and it's got 2 rows in it. And if I jump over to my server status list over here in SharePoint, this is the same list, 2 rows, DB server, SharePoint server. Okay, now one thing that's a little bit different with Visio is you don't link it to an entire data source, you link individual data items to individual rows. So what I would do is I would drag DB server onto the DB server, and if you look over here, that little icon says that this row is linked to the piece of data. I'm going to do the same for the SharePoint server. Right. Now, similar to what we did earlier, if we want to show that data, we can go Edit Data Graphic, hit New Item, and you'll notice that the items that are in this list are now coming from that particular SharePoint list. The CPU percentage wasn't there before. We've also got a couple of extra options, so we could display it simply as a text bar, which is pretty easy, or we can display it as a data bar. So let's do a data bar, minimum 0, maximum 100, hit OK. And what you've got is you've got that data bar. Let's do the same for SharePoint and show how that displays a little bit differently. So edit data graphic, new item. Once again, we're going to choose CPU percentage. Let's choose data bar, minimum, maximum, hit OK. Cool. Now we're showing this, it'll update as and when those values update. Let me publish this through to SharePoint again. Web drawing, and I'm just going to overwrite that. Alright, now what you'll notice is when the screen comes up, it's giving you a message saying, when do you want to do the refresh? So by default, it's always disabled. What you can do is when you publish it for the first time, you can enable it for always. If you don't do that, your users will have to hit this enable for this session. So enable always, and we now have a dynamic changing list. So in all theory, if we jump over here and we change this DB server, let's make it 90, save it away, this should update. And boom, as you come in, your data graphics will update. Rachel, I think let's take a couple questions, because we've done some of the basic stuff, and then after we've taken some questions, we'll jump back and I'll show you creating your own custom data graphics where you customize those shapes.
Okay, great. So John would like to know, is there any way to clear, oh, just kidding. Cindy would like to know, what is the lowest version of Visio that will work with this?
What's the lowest version of Visio that will work with this? Mm-hmm. So the stuff that we've done here is really around Visio 2010 and SharePoint 2010. A lot of the interactive data connected pieces are Visio 2010 and SharePoint 2010. It's really a new feature in the newest version.
Okay. So another question we have is, what book or other good tutorial could you recommend for Visio Services?
Okay, what I'll do is I'll pop a couple links up uh, in the GoToMeeting at the end. I do have a couple links that I've gone through. I haven't found a book that I really would recommend yet that I've read. So what I'll do is I'll pop you a couple of the links that I used.
Oh, perfect. Okay, and our last question is from Scott, and he says, I cannot find those different server shapes in Visio 2010 Professional. Is
You
it not
can't
available?
find the different server shapes. Okay, what you can do there is there's a couple things there. So if you go new, you've got these different templates that you use, and that defines what shapes you've got. So if you chose cross-functional flowchart instead of detailed network diagram, you wouldn't see those servers by default. What you could do is if you hit this More Shapes button, those will be under, I think, rack-mounted servers or possibly servers, depending on what you're looking for. So if you go More Shapes, I mean, right here I could add something like a EOD and I'd have those shapes available, or I could close them and make them disappear. So you would handle all of that with the More Shapes over there.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Mark.
Okay, so this is really the basics of Visio Services, and really this is what I've seen a lot of people working with, because you've got a bit of power over here. Now, if you want to take it a step further, and instead of using their standard bars, you actually want to use something a little bit more fancy, you maybe want to build an infographic, something like that, then you're moving on to the next level. And really what you're going to do is you're going to open up your Developer tab to start off with. You're going to say, give me the document stencil. I want a Master Explorer. Hang on a moment. There we go. Okay, so you want your document stencil and you want your Drawing Explorer. And here in the Drawing Explorer, what you've got is you've got a list of the masters that have been used inside your Visio diagram. If you want to do something like create a custom data graphic, you need to create a new master inside this list. So I'm going to go new master, and I'm going to call it webinar graphic. Okay. Now, it's quite important that you do it in the Drawing Explorer. It's appeared in your document stencil over there. You can now use it. Let's go ahead and let's edit this. So we're going to say edit the shape. I'm going to go edit shape. And now I'm going to do a little bit of drawing on this particular document. So I'm going to start off, I'm just going to draw a rectangle as a basic reference point. Great. I've got a rectangle on my sheet, and I want to make this rectangle a data graphic. So there's a couple things I have to do. First thing is I need to bring up the shape sheet, and really you can think of the shape sheet as the property sheet for everything inside Visio. If we hit the shape sheet, you'll notice that firstly it rearranges your window in quite a dramatic way, but what it gives you is it gives you this sheet where you can actually change things. So you want it to change the width, and you actually want it to be 112, but it was difficult to drag it, that sort of thing. That's the basics. The next step that we want to do is we want to start doing some customization. First thing is we need to enable this as a data graphic. So I'm going to say insert section, geometry protection, user defined and shape data. And we get a couple of extra definitions over here. So the first one that I want to do is I want to tell Visio that this is a data graphic. And there is no easy way of doing these, and I will pop out notes on what all of these functions are. Rachel will add that into the slide deck when it gets distributed. And we want to tell Visio that this is a callout type data bar. Okay, so here we're saying this shape is a data bar. The next thing we want to do, so when it's a data bar, Visio needs to be able to send the data bar a number. And that number, we say MSV callout field. Okay, and I'm going to give this a number of 75 for testing. That's all good. One little intricacy is this doesn't save when you click save. You have to actually hit exit and say update. Okay, so that's all good. Let's go have a look at what's actually happened in the background. I go Data, Edit Data Graphic, New Item, CPU Percentage. I'm going to choose Data Bar. And there you'll notice this is new. So here we've got a shape that we've just created. It's the webinar graphic, and it's now a data graphic that we can use. Okay, when that happens, what it means is I've actually left out a step. And let's jump back in here. So the step that I've left out is you have to convert this to a group. So let's convert that to a group. Let's go to the shape sheet. That should be it. Yep. Yeah. Let's delete that one. There we go. So that's one little step, and it's quite, the grouping is quite important, and we'll get onto it in a little bit more detail right now. So here we've got an additional data graphic. Its size is related to the size of the other graphic, which is why it's shown up so big. Now let's jump in and go edit the data graphic. So I'm going to remove that quickly. And I'm going to jump in and edit this. Okay, so let me just maximize it. Here we've got a base for our data graphic. Maybe what we want to do is add in a couple of extra shapes. So I'm just going to add in a couple of bars. 1, 2. Now, you know what? Let's just delete that one. Copy this one. Right, now what you could do is you could have a series of bars, or you could have a series of little stickmen or images or whatever. What we're going to do is we're going to make them appear and disappear dynamically. So the first thing we need to do is we need to add them to that group that we added previously. So start by clicking the shape that you started with. That's really important that you do this in the right order. Select your other components. You can hit this group again, and you're going to say add to group. So the first step was convert to group. The second step is add to group. Right, so now I'm going to select my particular item. I'm going to go to the shape sheet. Now what I want to do is I know that there's 2 items over there. You could have more. I'm going to say give me an additional user row. And I'm going to say filled. So here I'm converting that percentage into a value. Okay, so let me just put in the maximums and mins. I need a couple extra rows. Now you remember there was a maximum and a minimum earlier. We have to enter those in. So MSV callout prop max. Need to get the case right. Label is max. Maximum 100. MSV min. So this label is what's going to display when you're actually setting this up, and that's the default value for it. I'm going to go to my users.filled. I'm going to paste that formula. You just zoom in on the formula over there. So all the formula is doing, and let me go to the beginning of it, show formulas. All this formula is doing is saying take the value that's being sent, this callout field, divide it by the property minus the property minimum, and times it by 4. And really 4 was just to convert it so that if I've got 4 items. Right. Okay, so next thing we want to do is we want to actually show the shape sheet for this thing. Show shape sheet. We want to do the same thing that we insert that section. And we want user-defined cells. And I'm just going to say, give me the fill from that previous one that I did. Now, if you have a look here, this is sheet 5 over there. Let's hop over to this one. You need to be careful about which shape sheets you're working on because it can get a little bit confusing. Right, and that's saying that that's 0. Is that right? Okay. What I'm going to do is I'm going to set that value to 75, and you'll see as I've changed this value. So this value here is the actual value that will get sent in. It's 75. It's working it out to 1 out of 4, so now it's 3. And I think let's make it 1 out of 2 because we've got 2 blocks. Now let's make it a, okay, 1 out of 4 is fine. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to close that one. I'm going to open this one. So now we're going to edit the second shape. I'm going to say use the define cells. I'm going to say fold. And I'm going to pull that value from the first one. Cool. So that's pretty basic so far. Now, the way I've set this out is to actually have 4 of these. So let's copy that and do a second one. Let's just check that it picked it up automatically, and it often won't. Okay. Cool. So we haven't done anything really fancy yet. What we want to do next is we actually just want to add those to that group. And now I'm going to go back to the first shape, and now I'm actually going to do the active part. Now, there's a couple different things you can do. And let me just check the sections. Shape layout. Ah, there we go. I had this one hidden. I was trying to find that. Okay, so here's the sheet width. And this is saying how wide is that particular, saying take the width of the whole thing and times it by this number. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say if that user filled number, this one over here, which is currently 3, if that user filled number is larger than 1, then give it this width. Cool, so that's the first one. I think I put that width in a little bit wrong. I left out a 0. It's 0.0159. Let's jump back and just finish that up. Okay. Alright, so we do it for the second one. We go show shape sheet. We say if user field is larger than or equal to 2, then make it that width, otherwise 0. Do it for the third one. And again, if user field is larger than or equal to 3, show it. Of course it will be because the value is 75 over 100, so it's 3/4. And then the fourth one is where it gets exciting, because now we change it to 4, and the width is 0. As you can see, it's made it thinner. Now, you can do various other things. Width is just the easiest one to show. Let's update it. Yep. Let's jump back to our graphic. Now I'm going to add this as a data graphic. Let's add it to our DB server. Edit data graphic, new item, use CPU percentage, data bar, use my webinar graphic. Boom, and as you can see, it's shrinking and enlarging each one of those different items. So this is pretty cool. I've done the width over here. You could, of course, do something like change the transparency, change the color. In fact, Visio will often change the color for you. And these are very, very basic data graphics. One little challenge that you might find as you do these things is you need to be careful about how you build these graphics up. Sometimes if you start using complicated images and changing their properties, when you publish it to the web, you start getting issues with the publishing where the Silverlight renderer doesn't know what you're trying to tell it to do. So let's connect the data graphic for Visio up. And we want CPU percentage, data bar, webinar. Yep. As you can see, because the data is different, it's showing those bars differently. Let's go ahead and just save this to Sharepoint. Yep, let's overwrite it. And I'm going to enable it. So, as you can see, here it's picked up that data that we have in SharePoint. So if we jump here, we change SharePoint server to, say, 15. We hit refresh. You'll notice that those bars will appear and disappear. And there's a whole bunch of other things that you can do with that. So I think that's really the basics of what I wanted to show you over there. Let's review the process one more time because there's quite a lot of different things that we were doing. And I'm just going to touch on it quickly. So first one is under the Developer tab, make sure you got your Drawing Explorer. That's step one. Second one is you need a new master. I'm going to call it Demo Master 2. All right, that's step 2. Step 3, edit the master shape and start adding your shapes. Now what you need is you need a initial shape. It could be the first in your series or it could be a row bar. It needs to be a group. So you must make it a group. If you don't make it a group, it doesn't become a interactive graphic. Great. Next thing, show the shape sheet. And then you've got to put those extra sections in the shape sheet. So the two sections, user defined in data. So it's pretty easy to remember. It's just the first two. All right. Set those properties, and it's MSV callout type, and it's a data bar. There are, of course, a couple other callout types that you can use, like text and MSV callout field. Now, the other thing you need to remember at this point is insert row. We need a minimum and a maximum if we're going to do those calculations. Those will be MSV callout prop min. All right, I'm not going to fill those values in now. I'm just going to do the last one, and I'll fix the name in just a bit. Max. And then after that, if you add any other shapes, we might add an ellipse or some freeform. We just need to add them to that group. And then the final piece is setting up that shape and starting to put its calculations in. So that's a bit of an overview of those things. What I'm going to do now is, while we take some questions, I'm going to just pop one or two of those links up on the screen, and we can take a couple of questions. So I'm going to go to the last page, and I'll edit that and put the links in.
All right. Well, actually, we only have one question at this point, and it is from Dan, and he just wants to clarify that if he wants to use Visio Services in SharePoint 2010, he needs to be using Visio 2010, right? That Visio 2007 will not work.
Yeah, the data links from Visio 2010 is new. You could, if you were trying to do basic diagrams and share them over SharePoint 2010, that will work. But the data connections that I showed with the updating of the data, that doesn't work in quite the same manner.
How are you? Hello, Mark. Are you still with
Okay,
us?
so a couple of the other links that I was using when we were building it, put it up.
Okay, great reference material.
Cool.
All right, we have
And what we'll do is anybody who goes to my blog of BIDN, we will have an entire write-up of what we did here, including some of the more advanced graphics rather than just the individual shapes, because of course those take a little bit more time.
Okay, great. So I think that's it for today. Unless you have anything else you want to add, Mark, before we end the session.
No?
All right.
I think that's it. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone, for joining us. And be sure to join us every Tuesday and Thursday at 11 for free training. You can also follow us on Twitter at PW Free Training. Thank you, and have a great day.